Was there any other teams that potentially you knew that were trying to get you, or was it?
There were other teams that were interested, and obviously there's certain players that I have a lot of love and affinity for.
You're talking about Davante Adams?
Oh my goodness, Raider Nation, we have an update on what could have happened, what could have been between Aaron Rodgers and the Raiders. And we also have more players around the NFL chiming in on Wedding Gate between Josh McDaniels and Darren Waller. But the Raiders do have Jimmy Garapollo as their quarterback, and they've made a ton of free agent signings. What is the plan going forward, and how could they possibly build this team into something special? So we discovered on the Pat McAfee show today that Aaron Rodgers will likely be joining the New York Jets. They are just working out the trade compensation for Aaron Rodgers, and he is going to go to the AFC. But him joining the Raiders was a possibility. It was actually something that could have happened, but unfortunately it did not happen. And judging by Aaron Rodgers' comments, it seems like it would be something that he would like to happen.
Reuniting with especially one specific person would have been
Davante in Las Vegas.
Not mentioning any names, but
Jeff Howe, the Athletic, has also confirmed that the Raiders did check in on Aaron Rodgers, asked about his availability, but when a trade could not come together, the Raiders signed Jimmy Garapollo, and so now Rodgers is of course going to the Jets. But it's crazy to think that it could have happened, and the question is why? Why didn't it happen? And maybe Davante Adams and Josh Jacobs, these players who for a little bit seemed a little let's just say bothered by some of the Raiders signings or the Raiders fans' reaction to the recent signings in free agency. Maybe up until recently they thought Aaron Rodgers was a possibility, and I feel like judging by everything that's said here, everything that Aaron Rodgers has said, what Davante Adams has said, he said it would be a dream come true to play with Aaron Rodgers again. I have a feeling that there is one guy responsible for the fact that the Raiders did not fork up enough compensation to go out there and grab Aaron Rodgers, because that's ultimately why nothing happened, right? Because a trade couldn't come together between the Packers and the Raiders for Aaron Rodgers. That means that the reason why Rodgers didn't visit the Raiders and the Jets went out there and visited Aaron Rodgers, the reason why the Raiders likely had no permission is probably because they weren't willing to fork up as much trade capital as the New York Jets were. And McDaniels and Ziegler likely made this decision, and perhaps Davante and Jacobs maybe thought it was still a possibility, but the Raiders decided to go ahead and go with Jimmy G. Another interesting thing is they actually inquired with the Chicago Bears for the #1 overall pick and tried to decide, how much it would be to give up all that capital to go ahead and get that #1 overall pick. And obviously they decided not to do it, and the Panthers went in and traded for the #1 overall pick. But that also shows that there was a quarterback in the draft right now the Raiders are somewhat interested in and think would be possibly worth the #1 overall pick. Maybe it could be somebody like CJ Stroud. So now the Raiders in this situation where they're rolling with Jimmy Garapollo, basically a 2-year deal. They can get out of it in some ways. Basically, if they get rid of him after 1 year, it could be a $23 million 1-year deal if another team picks him up the next year. However, if another team does not pick him up the next year, they will owe a roster bonus of about $11 million for 2024 if they did move on from Jimmy Garapollo. But Raiders pretty much made this a backup plan, and maybe it is the best plan. There's two different sides to this. There's some people who think the Raiders should pursue a championship right now. They went to the playoffs in 2021. They have Davante Adams. They had Darren Waller before they shipped him away to the Giants. Why not try to make a push right here, right now? They have a great offense. And there's another side that just thinks, hey, let's let Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler have their time and build a team for long-term success and not try to put all your eggs in the basket this year. However, if the Raiders are rebuilding, then the Davante Adams trade last year just made absolutely no sense. So that is what's confusing for me. The Raiders are doing certain moves on the offensive side of the football where it seems like they're competing for a championship, and then they're doing other moves as well that seem like they're rebuilding, getting rid of certain players who you think would help you have a lot of success. But ultimately, what the Carolina Panthers gave up for the #1 overall pick, I think is just way too expensive. Multiple second-round picks, multiple first-round picks, and a #1 wide receiver in DJ Moore. And there are reports that Aaron Rodgers will be about 2 first-round picks, and I'm not sure if that is exactly worth it, especially since the Raiders have so many holes on the defensive side of the football. When you look at the offense of the Raiders, though, outside of the right side of the offensive line and now tight end, you do have a solid group and a lot of solid players at your your skill position. But we just know on the defensive side of the ball, question marks all over the place and not much depth at all. But it is really confusing to think about what went down last year with the Raiders. It seemed like they made so many moves last year that made it seem like you're competing for a championship, and now based off the offseason moves this year, seems like they're doing a soft rebuild, soft reload to try to compete in about 2 years, maybe 3 years, and also see if you can get lucky with somebody like Jimmy Garapollo. Because here's the thing, Jimmy Garapollo does not get asked to throw the ball that much. In 2019, when Jimmy Garapollo played the most games in a single season of his entire career and even went to the Super Bowl and eventually lost to the Kansas City Chiefs, in that season, he only threw for 476 pass attempts. That is actually the highest of his career in a single season, and that is so small. Derek Carr has never ever had a season in his career where he's thrown for under 500 pass attempts. So that is definitely a concern for Jimmy Garapollo, but there is a chance that he does work out. If he stays healthy and you have tons of skill position players on the offensive side of the football, he can work out. He can end up looking good as long as he's able to sustain a season and doesn't make too many mistakes. But I think the concern right now is with Josh Jacobs going forward, because he knows with the Raiders, with Jimmy Garapollo, he's going to be asked to do the majority of the work running the football, even though he's only playing on that franchise tag. Maybe we will be surprised and Jimmy Garapollo will throw it the most he's ever thrown in his career, and Josh Jacobs won't be asked to carry the majority of the workload. But based on history and all the numbers, we know that's not likely. And Darren Waller's wife, Kelsey Plum, the Las Vegas Aces star basketball player, tweeting about the fact that Josh McDaniels was not invited to the wedding. Man, this has been completely blowing up. It's actually been pretty insane. I mean, 15 million views on Twitter. That's crazy. She did a follow-up because it did blow up so much and people thought she was gonna leave the Las Vegas Aces, saying it was a joke. I love Las Vegas, here to defend the title, yada, yada, yada. But it does still show, I mean, that she was making fun of Josh McDaniels. It's undeniable. I mean, she probably regrets it because it got so much attention, but you're making fun of the fact that the guy was not invited to the wedding when people are talking about how McDaniels traded away Waller on their honeymoon. And you got more people chiming in about Josh McDaniels. So when Vic Tafur made this tweet saying that Josh McDaniels accidentally leaked the news of Darren Waller's wedding at the combine to reporters, and Darren Waller was upset about that, you have Vic Tafur of The Athletic commenting on that. You have Quandre Diggs from the Seattle Seahawks saying Patriot Way and talking about this, almost throwing some shade at McDaniels there. And we thought, hey, Darius Slay, cornerback, just got released by the Eagles. Maybe the Raiders should hit him up. Well, guess what? Darius Slay retweeted Quandre Diggs and saying, I'm trying to tell you, but hey, people thought I was tripping and didn't like being coached. So Darius Slay did play with Matt Patricia when he was the head coach of the Detroit Lions. Matt Patricia comes from the New England Patriots. Since being fired by the Detroit Lions as their head coach, has now returned to the New England Patriots. He is actually kind of their offensive coordinator last year. So this is all players sort of mocking the Patriot way, and coaches who come from the New England Patriots and Bill Belichick go on to be head coaches elsewhere and fail and then return and sort of have this hard-nosed attitude, odd tactics. Maybe the implication is that the wedding news was leaked on purpose. Who knows what it is, but it is showing that, you know, they're not too likable. They're not too likable right now. Quick news on some former players. Cleveland Farrell has reached a 1-year deal with the San Francisco 49ers, former number 4 overall pick in the 2019 draft. Let's see if he could bounce back and save his career after being, you know, underwhelming for how high he was drafted. And you also have Arden Key, the former 3rd-round pick from the Raiders in 2018. He played with the Niners for a little bit and then with the Jags last season, has reached a deal with the Titans for about $7 million a year, 3-year, $21 million contract. So former Raiders moving on. Once a Raider, always a Raider. Just interesting to see. So we know the Raiders made some moves. They signed Marcus Epps here, the strong safety, and they already have Trayvon Merrick, and they also signed Spillane, the linebacker. More of a run stuffer type guy. They still have Tyler Hall under contract. He's still there with the Raiders, and Meek Robertson and Nate Hobbs as well. The Raiders signed cornerback Brandon Facyson, and his contract finally came out. It is a 2-year deal, $6.5 million contract with $700,000 guaranteed, according to OverTheCap.com. This means he could be a starter. This is almost starting cornerback money, maybe a depth piece, not a huge commitment in terms of guarantees, but could be a real starter for the Raiders this year at corner. But no addition at the defensive tackle position yet for the Raiders. As far as the defensive side of the football, I believe still have a need at linebacker unless they really believe in Luke Masterson or Divine Diablo, and they also still have a need at defensive tackle. tackle, maybe even another, depending on how they feel about Bilal Nichols, fell. Now, on the offensive side of the football, obviously there's Jimmy Garapollo, like basically a 2-year deal at quarterback, potentially a 1-year deal if another team picks him up if the Raiders did move on. And then you have Jakobi Meyers, another receiver likely going to be in the slot. There is a possibility that I've been hearing that he could play wide, and Hunter Renfrow could be somebody who still is on the Raiders in the slot. It is possible for Meyers to play wide. He does have the side, but 2/3 of his snaps with New England, at least last year, were in the slot. So that is going to be a concern. Maybe the Raiders do move on from Hunter Renfrow. Obviously, the big news is that they moved on from Darren Waller, and it does suck because you know that guy, when he's healthy, he could be a dynamic player. Just hasn't worked out lately. Still have some holes on the offensive line. Re-signed Parker and Muti, but definitely can see them upgrading there and perhaps even grabbing a tight end pretty high in the draft, especially given the fact that they don't have Darren Waller anymore. So the Raiders still have some holes at cornerback, interior defensive line, and also at tight end and the right side of the offensive line, and also at quarterback. Who's going to back up Jimmy Garapollo in case he goes down? So they've given themselves some flexibility in the draft, especially in the first round. I could see them going interior defensive line or corner, but definitely I still think quarterback's on the table. If you were interested in trading up for the #1 overall pick with the Chicago Bears, but they wanted too much, well, there must be a guy out there that they want. So hopefully he falls, but I do not see somebody like CJ Stroud falling. I think the Raiders may at least have to hope to have the option to choose either Anthony Richardson or Will Levis. We'll see what they do if they pick a quarterback at pick #7 and keep you up to date with everything happening with the Raiders. My name is WiFiWillie. Peace out, and I hope you have a good one.